I still remember the first time I stepped through the doorway of that house. It was supposed to be just another rental, a place to sleep while I figured out where life was taking me. But from the moment the door opened, it felt different, warmer, quieter, almost like the house itself was waiting for me. She was there, my landlady. Early 40s, tall, with a kind of elegance that wasn't showy but impossible to miss. Her presence filled the hallway before she even said a word. She greeted me with a smile that was polite, but not distant. It was the kind of smile that hinted she had already measured me up and decided, for now, that I belonged. The first thing I noticed was her voice, low, steady, like the calm part of a song you don't want to end. She welcomed me inside, and I caught the faintest scent of something in the air, a mix of brewed tea and lavender, the kind of smell that makes you want to sit down and stay a while. She showed me the living room first. Sunlight fell through thin curtains, softening everything. The furniture wasn't new, but it carried the kind of comfort that comes from being well-kept, well-loved. I was halfway through admiring the details when another voice drifted from the kitchen, lighter, brighter, with an ease that contrasted her sister's steadiness. That was when I met her, the landlady's younger sister. She walked in holding 2 steaming mugs of tea, her steps quick, her smile unguarded. She was just as striking as her sister, but in a different way. Where one was poised, the other was playful, carrying a kind of warmth that pulled you closer without effort. She handed me a mug, and when our fingers touched, I felt the first spark of something I couldn't yet name. Her laugh came easily when she teased her sister about being too formal, and in that moment, I realized they were opposites that somehow completed each other. I sat with them in that sunlit living room, sipping tea I hadn't asked for but was glad to have. They spoke to me not as strangers renting out a room, but as if they were already letting me into their rhythm. The landlady asked about my work, her eyes steady, searching for the kind of man I was. Her sister interrupted with jokes, her laughter filling the room like a melody. And me, I just listened, caught somewhere between them, noticing the way they glanced at each other with an ease born of years spent sharing everything. It was subtle, but I could already feel it. I wasn't just stepping into a house. I was stepping into their lives. That first afternoon, I thought I was only a tenant. But even then, a quiet part of me knew this story was never going to be simple. The days that followed settled into a rhythm, though nothing about it felt ordinary to me. Living under their roof meant that little by little, I became part of the small details of their daily lives. And in those details, I began to notice how much warmth they carried. Warmth I hadn't realized I'd been missing. It started with something simple. One evening, the landlady asked if I could help her carry a few grocery bags in from the car. The late sun had painted the driveway in golden light, and I remember how her silhouette looked softer in that glow. As I reached to take the heavier bags from her arms, her hand brushed against mine, not intentionally, but enough that my chest stirred with an awareness I couldn't ignore. She gave a small, almost grateful smile, one that lingered longer than necessary, before looking away. Inside, her sister was already unpacking items in the kitchen. She had rolled up her sleeves, humming to herself as she placed vegetables into a bowl. When I walked in, she looked up with that easy brightness that seemed to follow her everywhere. "You're just in time," she said, waving me over. "I was about to teach your landlady here how to actually season food properly." The landlady raised her eyebrows, smirking in quiet defense, while her sister tugged me toward the counter. And just like that, I found myself leaning beside her, shoulder to shoulder, watching as she showed me how to chop herbs. At one point her hair slipped forward, brushing lightly against my arm, and without thinking, I held my breath. She didn't notice, or maybe she did, but she didn't move away. That evening, we cooked together. Or rather, they cooked, and I stood between them, handing over spoons, tasting sauces, laughing at their banter. The landlady's humor was quieter, drier, while her sister's laughter spilled out freely, filling the kitchen with a warmth I hadn't felt in a long time. And somewhere between the clinking of pans and the scent of garlic sizzling in oil, I realized how comfortable I had become in their presence. Later, when we sat down to eat, I caught the landlady watching me more than once, not with suspicion, but with a measured kind of attention, as if she was studying the way I fit into this space that had always been theirs. Her sister noticed too. She leaned close, whispering, "Don't mind her. She pretends she's the serious one, but she's just as curious about you as I am." Her words carried a playful tone, but her eyes held something softer, something I felt settle inside me. By the end of the night, I found myself thinking less about the room I was renting and more about the home I was slowly becoming part of. These weren't just my landlady and her sister anymore. They were two women whose presence was beginning to matter to me in ways I couldn't yet explain. Nights in that house always felt different than anywhere else I'd lived before. The neighborhood was quiet, but it wasn't the silence of emptiness. It was the kind of stillness that makes every sound matter. A creak in the floorboards, the distant hum of a passing car, the soft ticking of the clock in the hall. All of it seemed amplified, like the house itself was listening. One of those nights, I found myself downstairs later than usual. I couldn't sleep, so I wandered to the kitchen for a glass of water. The living room lamp was still on, spilling a warm amber glow across the floor. And there she was, my landlady, sitting on the couch with a book in her lap, though her eyes weren't on the pages. She looked up when she noticed me, and instead of the usual polite smile, she gave a smaller one, touched with something weary. "Couldn't sleep either?" she asked softly. I nodded, setting my glass on the table and hesitating before sitting across from her. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The quiet between us wasn't uncomfortable, though. It felt like the air was holding space for something unspoken. She finally broke it, her voice quieter than I'd ever heard it. "It's strange," she said, "how a house can be so full and still feel empty sometimes." Her eyes flicked toward the framed photos on the wall, reminders of people who were no longer around. Family, perhaps. A past life she rarely spoke about. I didn't press her for details, but I listened, really listened. And maybe that was enough, because she kept talking. She told me how renting out the house wasn't just about income. It was about filling the silence, about not wanting to be the only voice echoing off the walls at night. Her words hung in the air, and I could see how much effort it cost her to say them. I wanted to answer carefully, not with platitudes, but with honesty. "For what it's worth," I said, "you've made it feel like home for me already." Something in her expression softened at that. She reached for her mug of tea, but instead of lifting it, her hand rested briefly against mine on the table. It wasn't long, just a few seconds, but I felt the warmth of her touch travel deeper than I expected. Before I could say anything, her sister appeared in the doorway, her hair loose from sleep. She rubbed her eyes, smiling faintly. "I knew I'd find you both awake. Neither of you knows how to rest." She joined us, curling into the corner of the couch, and soon the three of us sat there under the glow of a single lamp, trading pieces of ourselves we rarely shared. Her laughter, softer now, balanced her sister's seriousness, and together they pulled me into a moment I never wanted to end. That night, I realized something important. Behind their strength and their grace, both of them carried quiet loneliness. And for the first time, I began to feel like maybe I was meant to ease it. It was a quiet evening, the kind where the day had folded in on itself, and the air outside smelled faintly of rain. I had been helping in small ways around the house, tightening a loose shelf, carrying boxes from the attic, and by the time we finished, the house was wrapped in stillness. The landlady offered me tea, her usual ritual, and we sat in the living room with the lamp casting its amber glow. Her sister had already gone upstairs, leaving just the two of us. For the first time, the silence between us felt heavy, not uncomfortable, but charged, like we both knew something was waiting to be said. She leaned back into the sofa, sighing as though the day's weight had finally caught up to her. "You've been a great help," she murmured, her voice softer than usual. "This house, it feels lighter with you here." I wanted to answer, to tell her I felt the same, but the words tangled in my chest. Instead, I watched as her eyes flickered toward me and lingered, just a second too long. That pause stretched into something that neither of us could ignore. She reached forward suddenly, not with hesitation but with a kind of quiet decision, and brushed a loose strand of hair from my forehead. Her fingers lingered longer than they should have, warm against my temple. The simple act should have been nothing, but in that moment, it was everything. The touch startled me, not because it was unwelcome, but because of how natural it felt, how much my chest ached at the tenderness of it. I caught her hand gently before she could pull away. For a second, her breath caught, and in that silence, we both understood that the boundaries between us had shifted. "I don't want to overstep," I whispered, searching her face for doubt. She shook her head faintly, her lips curving into the smallest, almost sorrowful smile. "You haven't." And then she leaned closer, not closing the space entirely, but enough that I could feel the warmth of her presence, the faint perfume of her skin, the quiet steadiness of her breathing. When she finally moved, it wasn't a kiss, it was a hug, but it was the kind of embrace that spoke volumes. Her arms slipped around my shoulders, drawing me in until her cheek rested lightly against mine. I felt the rhythm of her heartbeat, steady and vulnerable, and for a few suspended seconds, the rest of the world vanished. My hands hovered awkwardly at first, then settled at her back, returning the embrace. When we finally parted, there was a silence that felt heavier than any words. I could see her searching for something in my face, some reassurance that she hadn't crossed too far. But I wasn't searching, I already knew. From the staircase, I noticed the faintest movement. Her sister stood there, half hidden in the shadows, watching with an expression I couldn't decipher. There was no anger, no jealousy, only a quiet softness in her eyes, as though she had expected this moment all along. And in that instant, I realized what was unfolding wasn't just about her. It was about both of them. The air in the house felt different after that night, after her hug, after the way her sister had quietly seen us in the half-darkness. I moved through the following days more aware of every glance, every brush of a hand, every pause in conversation. It was as though the space between the three of us had shifted, gently but undeniably. One evening, the rain had returned, tapping against the windows in steady rhythm. The three of us were in the living room, a soft lamp glowing in the corner. The landlady sat with her legs tucked neatly beneath her, reading glasses perched low as she turned the pages of a book. Her sister was sprawled more casually across the armchair, sipping wine with the kind of ease that made the room feel warmer. I was seated between them, not by intention but by where the night had guided me. The quiet stretched out, comfortable at first, until her sister broke it with words that hung heavier than her playful tone usually carried. "You know," she said, swirling the glass in her hand, "we've always shared everything, my sister and I." She glanced at her sister, a smile tugging at the corner of her lips, but there was weight in her eyes, something far more serious beneath the lightness. The landlady set her book down carefully, marking the page before meeting her sister's gaze. For a long moment, they just looked at each other, speaking in a language of silence only siblings know. Then, her eyes drifted to me. Her voice was steady, but softer than I'd ever heard it. "It's true," she said. "We've always been close. Closer than most people understand. And now," she trailed off, as if searching for the right words, before finally finishing, "we both feel it. With you." My heart stumbled in my chest. I didn't know whether to speak, to reassure, or simply to listen. Before I could decide, her sister leaned forward, resting her glass on the table and placing her hand lightly on mine. "We share everything," she said, her voice calm but carrying the weight of a vow. Her fingers tightened slightly, grounding me, steadying me. "Even you." I looked between them, two women bound by something unshakable, looking at me not with rivalry, not with jealousy, but with a unity I couldn't fully understand. The air felt charged, yet strangely safe. The landlady reached across the small space, her hand settling on my shoulder, warm and steady. "This isn't simple," she admitted, her eyes holding mine. "But neither are we. What matters is honesty, respect, care. If we have that, we can find our way." The three of us sat in that golden-lit room, hands linked in a quiet circle, the storm whispering outside. It wasn't dramatic, nor was it rushed. It was simply real, a moment when walls crumbled and truth stepped forward. And in their words, I understood, what they were offering wasn't possession. It was belonging. The days that followed carried a quiet shift, like the house itself had exhaled after holding its breath for too long. Nothing was spoken outright, yet everything was different. The way we moved through the space together had changed. Touches lingered, glances held more meaning, silences felt full instead of empty. It showed most in the small rituals we shared. One evening, we prepared dinner together again, the three of us moving around the kitchen as though we had been doing it for years. The landlady worked with practiced precision, chopping vegetables with the care of someone who had always taken responsibility for others. Her sister, as usual, brought laughter into the room, humming tunelessly as she stirred the pot, occasionally nudging me with her elbow, as if we were co-conspirators. At one point, I reached across the counter to hand her a wooden spoon, and instead of taking it quickly, she let her fingers brush against mine, slow, deliberate, a glance slipping upward with a quiet smile. From the other side of the kitchen, her sister watched, not with jealousy, but with a steady calmness, as though she took comfort in knowing we were finding balance. Dinner that night felt different, too. The three of us sat close around the table, candles flickering softly between plates. Conversation drifted easily, laughter spilling into pauses that no longer carried hesitation. At one moment, as I reached for the breadbasket, both of their hands moved at once, colliding gently with mine. None of us pulled away. Instead, we lingered there, our hands overlapping, sharing a silence that said more than words could. Afterward, we carried our glasses into the living room. Music played softly from a small speaker, something slow and old that gave the room a dreamlike quality. The landlady sat beside me on the couch, her presence steady, grounding. Her sister curled against the armrest, her legs tucked beneath her, her eyes flicking between us with a contentment that mirrored my own. For the first time, I realized I no longer felt like a guest in their home. I wasn't the tenant in the spare room. I was part of something, fragile, unconventional, but real. And in that realization came a surprising peace. Later, as the night wound down, I stood to gather the dishes, but the landlady touched my arm, stopping me. Her hand rested there longer than necessary, her thumb brushing lightly against my sleeve. "Leave it," she said softly. "Stay." I did. The three of us sat in the glow of lamplight, the rain tapping gently on the windows once more. No one said what we were all thinking, that we had crossed into something uncharted, that the world outside might never understand. But in that moment, surrounded by their warmth, none of it mattered. Belonging, I realized, isn't about definitions or roles. It's about the quiet certainty that you are exactly where you're meant to be. The last weeks blurred into a rhythm so natural I almost forgot there was ever a time I hadn't lived in that house. Each morning, the smell of coffee drifted through the kitchen before I was even awake, and in the evenings, laughter seemed to find its way into every corner of the living room. What had once been two sisters sharing a home had grown into something else entirely, something that included me, in ways I still struggled to put into words. One night, the three of us took a walk. The rain had finally broken, leaving the streets slick and shining beneath the glow of the lamps. The landlady walked on my left, her sister on my right, and without planning it, we fell into step together. Her arm brushed mine lightly, steady and grounding, while her sister looped hers through the other side, pulling me closer with an easy laugh. We must have looked unusual to anyone passing by, but I didn't care. For the first time, I wasn't worried about how it looked, only about how it felt. And it felt right. At one point, the landlady slowed, glancing up at me with that quiet steadiness I had come to know so well. "You realize," she said softly, "that this isn't something most people will understand." Her sister gave a half-smile, leaning her head briefly against my shoulder. "When have we ever cared about what most people think?" I laughed, but there was weight in her words. They weren't asking me for an answer. They were asking me for a choice. I stopped walking and turned to face them both. The lamplight painted them in gold, one poised, reserved, her eyes full of unspoken hope, the other open, playful, but just as vulnerable beneath her smile. And in that moment, I realized it wasn't about choosing between them. It was about choosing with them. "I don't know where this goes," I admitted, my voice steadier than I felt. "But I know I don't want to be anywhere else. Not without you." The landlady reached for my hand first, her fingers warm, deliberate. Her sister followed, slipping hers over mine as well, so that the three of us stood there, hands joined in a quiet knot beneath the glow of the street lamp. We didn't speak after that. We didn't need to. The silence between us said everything, about the loneliness we had all carried, about the unexpected way we had found each other, and about the choice we were making together. When we finally turned back toward the house, their steps were lighter, and mine matched theirs. The home we returned to wasn't just four walls and a roof anymore. It was laughter shared over late dinners, arms brushing in narrow hallways, hands finding each other in the dark. Home, I realized, isn't a place you rent. It's the people who refuse to let you feel alone. And I had found mine.